Welcome to Mad Men, a podcast dedicated to recapping and analyzing the AMC series Mad Men from the perspective of three very different types of watchers. We have someone here who is watching the show for the very first time with us, and someone else who is rewatching the show for the first time since it finished airing in 2015, and then there's me, Jon Negroni, and I've decided I'm never going to be sick. We also have Will Ashton, our first time watcher, and Will, do you feel bad about what you did?
I mean, I don't feel great. I'm getting over some sort of cold thing. So I feel very sympathetic to Don this episode.
And of course, we have Mike Overhulse, our first-time re-watcher. And Mike, tell me, what do you get turned on by rape killings in the news?
I'm not even going to touch that one. I'm just going to say a cold no.
You see, that is the correct answer to that question. I'm a little confused myself why Matthew Weiner in the commentaries is like, everyone's so turned on by this news story. Oh my God, the commentary was weird this week. I sorry to start it right off the bat, but I had to get that across.
Weiner was being weird in the commentaries about something like sexual related. This is,
and
I'm
the guy
really
with him
to hear this.
The guy with him is just kind of like, yeah, okay. Maybe that I'm just hearing my own voice in that. I don't know. But okay, so yes, this week we're talking season 5, episode 4, mystery date of Mad Men. It aired April 8th, 2012. We're recording this in early March, so we're not that far off from the air date here. This episode was written by Victor Levin. It was directed by Matt Shakman. And yes, that is the WandaVision guy, funny enough. And hey, look, you can read some WandaVision stuff into this episode, I guess. Some of it would be a stretch. Some of it maybe not.
I mean,
yeah.
You might as well just say it's a director of the new Fantastic Four movie because it'll probably already be on Disney Plus by the time this episode comes out.
Well said. Yeah, we've been late. We've been late for sure. Very consistently late. The reference to this episode pretty clearly is the Milton Bradley board game Mystery Date. I don't know if you guys remember it. I think it was like around when we were growing up, but it wasn't, it wasn't Clue. It wasn't like Sorry, Risk, that kind of game, but it was something. And Sally does play it in the episode, to be clear.
I never played it. I didn't even realize it was a game. I think more of like the TV show.
Yeah, I thought it was a reference to the show, maybe.
Well, hey, it could be both. And either way, it's supposed to be a metaphor for the episode's themes, right? So fear of the unknown, the danger behind closed doors, the allure of fantasy. That's a lot of what this episode's going for. This episode is definitely a lot about men being pretty bad at everything, related to women especially. There's some real life event stuff in here, just to tee you all off. The Richard Speck murders, which I think those are mentioned or referenced in Mindhunter. I didn't look it up, but I kind of I don't remember if Richard Speck was in the show. I don't think he was, but I probably should have checked that earlier. But anyway, it's the murders here are a real life thing. They're referenced throughout the episode, especially in Sally's storyline. But the real life thing that happened is Richard Speck killed 8 student nurses in 1966. And so when the media was covering this, the commentaries, it was kind of interesting because they had to tackle what the media knew at the time. What we know now is kind of different from what they knew back in 1966, like right when it happened. They assumed that these women were raped, but in reality, apparently Richard Speck was impotent. And so he killed them under the pretense, but it looked like, I don't know. The whole point is that the only reason they were able to get a lot of these background details is because of how the New York Times covered it. And so they relied on that quite a bit. But had you guys ever heard of these murders before?
I have, because of
you were there.
Mindhunter season 1, episode 9.
Okay, so it was okay.
Cover Richard Speck, yeah, and directed by David Fincher.
There you go. Okay, and I think Will's in episode 9, isn't he?
No, it's not 9. I did work on an episode that Fincher directed. I think it was a pilot, but my scene got cut. Or it was
you're in
reshot. It was reshot.
You're in the party scene, right, where Jonathan Groff walks into he's looking for his girlfriend, and you're like one of the party goers or something.
I don't remember it being a party. It was like some sort of a
hangout
study. It was in the dark.
Yeah,
and they were doing some sort of experiment, and Jonathan Groff is walking around. You're right. I have never got around to watching Mindhunter, so I don't know what the context of the scene was, but I do remember shooting that. That was kind of fun and kind of weird.
Will has been chased by the FBI before, is what you're saying.
Jonathan Groff was walking around, and he only had one shoe, and Will reaches out from the dark.
Is that a reference to something in Mindhunter? I have no idea.
No, it's a reference
Again,
to this TV show called Mad Men, man.
Yeah.
I see.
It's
The,
Yeah.
fit.
the
I
Cinderella
didn't
thing.
catch that at first either.
The Cinderella thing, yeah.
Yeah, but so this episode, it's well remembered for its kind of fever dream sequence, how that's handled too. They try to be really careful with it. Of like, so Don has this kind of fever dream. It's very surreal, very disturbing. It's one of the most disturbing things that happens, especially in the show so far. And yeah, Don, what a boy there. And so yeah, I how do you guys want to start this off? We could cover the fever dream, the guilt trip, or actually, I do kind of want to maybe play a little bit more into what you guys think of the episode overall. So we'll start with you, Mike.
Yeah, I actually would say I'm not a big fan of this episode. When I rewatched it the first time, yeah, I just kind of felt like I kind of was like in the middle of the road on it, being like, like it's good, it's not great. But then I think what was really telling for me was I rewatched this episode obviously for us to record, but then behind the scenes we couldn't record when we were going to, and then I was out of town, so we've been busy. So now it's been a couple weeks later, and I was like, should I rewatch the episode again? And I just like flat out didn't want to, which I think for me is telling of like, okay, maybe I'm not that big of a fan of this episode.
That makes sense. What about you, Will? I mean, you're obviously the first time watcher. Did this episode kind of catch you off guard, or did you just kind of feel like this was a natural continuation of the season 5 so far?
I'm closer to Mike, I think, than not. I think it's a well-written episode for the most part. Like, I think it coalesces in a very interesting way. But I just don't really think, especially when you compare it to like The Sopranos and how well that show in its later seasons was able to blend in the dream-like and the psychosis with this, it didn't really feel as organic to me as I felt like. And I think it's just because there's so much going on in this episode that it didn't really, I don't know. I feel like that didn't really get to flourish as much. And I was kind of disappointed that, obviously, I think Twin Peaks is like a big influence on hundreds of thousands of shows. And, you have Matt Shakman on, who's, one of the main characters on Twin Peaks. And you're going to go for a dream-like logic and the idea of like the suburbs and doing exactly what you seem. It seems like it's, I don't know, maybe for me, maybe it's my false perception of it. I felt like, and it's also because, when I started watching this episode, David Lynch hadn't died. And then I watched it and had died. I think the Lynch stuff was on my mind a lot more with this rewatch. And I just didn't really feel like it tapped into that as much as it could have and should have, given that it seemed like it was kind of dipping its toe into that territory. Obviously, it's going for like a 50s noir kind of thing, too, with like a almost supernatural femme fatale kind of thing. But I don't know. I just feel like the show, it's an interesting concept. Like I said, I think it's a well-written episode, but I just don't really feel like it lived up to its full potential. And I feel like, similar to Mike, rewatching it, I was hoping to be more favorable of it, but I feel like rewatching it, I was less enamored by it.
You know what's interesting? I was very much like, I've never liked rewatching this episode. I find it very uncomfortable. For some weird reason, though, I liked it a little bit more this time. I think maybe I think part of it was like the commentaries here in the, besides Matthew Weiner being a little bit of a freak on Maine, but just kind of like the way he talked about what they were going for. I think I respect this episode more because, again, yeah, it is well written, but it's so off-putting throughout, and it kind of moves the story forward, I guess. But and talking as somebody who hasn't watched Twin Peaks, and I didn't even realize that the actress in this, the one that tries to cheat with Don, is from Twin Peaks. So I didn't pick up on that any of the original times I watched the show. I gotta say, I guess I do respect this one. I think going for the David Lynchian thing, I think you're right, Will. I think that it's like, well, if David Lynch directed this episode, maybe, I mean, it wouldn't be the same show, right? And so maybe it's a little bit of a stay in your lane kind of situation.
I mean,
maybe.
I guess this will kind of serve as like a tribute of sorts to David Lynch, because he was a big fan, as many people pointed out in their tributes to David Lynch when he passed. He was a big fan of Mad Men, which makes a lot of sense given how much he loves this sort of like 50s,
Weiner's
60s
a big fan
era.
of,
yeah.
Weiner's a big fan of Twin Peaks. He's a big fan of David Lynch. He doesn't mention Blue Velvet in the commentaries, but I have to imagine Blue Velvet is a big inspiration here as well. So yeah, and this is, like, to be fair, I think we can agree this is the closest that Mad Men gets to going Lynchian in its entire run. And so, Will, you wouldn't know, of course, the entire run, but especially thus far.
It's so crazy the timing of that then, if that's the case.
Right.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think the episode's just like too packed? Like, do you think they could have put the Joan stuff maybe in a different episode? And
That's what I'm thinking. Because I think when, like, this episode kind of reminds me of, I forget the name of the episode, but it's one of my favorite episodes of Sopranos, where it's focused primarily on Tony Soprano's dream. And it's like kind of going through the things where he's like trying, I have to kind of dance around it because it's heavy in spoiler territory for Sopranos. But it's like he's trying to figure out something about Steve Buscemi's character. And it's like his psychosis is kind of like telling him through multiple like reoccurring dream kind of things. And it's also kind of similar to an episode in season 2, I guess, where Tony has something similar to that with Big Pussy. So yeah.
I just like hearing you say that.
Oh, okay. I mean that's that's the guy's name in the show. I mean, so
yeah. I think if I guess like to devil's advocate, I do agree, but I guess you could make the argument that the metaphor for Mystery Date kind of applies. You could, because the big thing that happens with Joan and Greg, it happens in a date. You know, it's a bad date. Joan letting him into her life. You know, this is a guy who looked great on paper. You know, that kind of charming guy, but there was always a violence underneath, like when he raped her. So there is some kind of like connection there. He's always been very controlling, but also weak and abusive with her at the same time. And that is the central thesis of the episode. However, I still do think that like yes, on paper, like the writing of this, sure, but there is still like a whiplash here. Like there's no real direct connection to the Speck murders where all the other plots have that. They either have literal or symbolic ties to the Speck killings. So that's why this feels so out of place, I think.
Well, I mean, like you're saying, I mean, even though it wasn't a rape case, I'm assuming the fact that people thought it was a rape case is what it's supposed to be tying this to Joan and her now to be ex-husband.
That's why it doesn't really work, because like in her case it was rape. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. It almost fits. Like that's the thing. That's kind of what makes it frustrating.
Yeah, I think Mike is correct. I think that probably this subplot probably would have worked better placed in a different episode. Because I think a lot of the stuff in it is really interesting, especially the stuff with Peggy and Don D-A-W-N, not Don D-O-N. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I do think it would have been for the better if they had either the opportunity or the willingness to kind of just lean full on into the Don sick dream thing, because I think it would have made it a more memorable and kind of more haunting episode for what it's otherwise going for. But and even and having that and the stuff with Sally kind of be the main focus back and forth because they're tied together so well, I think. Yeah, I just think it's kind of a packed episode, and I think they all touch upon one another more or less, like we're saying, but I don't know if they all cohese to something that feels fully realized.
I agree. I think the Dawn Fever dream is the weakest, the weakest of the executed plot points. Whereas, like, I did love the Don and Peggy storyline, but just overall, yeah, I felt like they were all fighting for the limelight, and maybe we could have focused a little bit more on the Fever dream. But we can dive into each of them if you want to talk about them, John.
And I liked the Sally and Pauline stuff too. You know, I find it to be very like charmingly cringe. You know, the whole all of that plays out, honestly. There's also like the moment with the scene where Roger kind of gets played around by Peggy a bit early in her subplot, and him kind of getting flat-footed off of the Mohawk thing. It's still so amazing to me, like how pathetic Roger is, because at this point in the series, because it's like the dude has been all talk, you know, of like, I want to still be relevant. I don't want Pete to walk all over me. It's like the last guy I hired, you know, it was Pete Campbell. And like, but then, you know, when push comes to shove and like he has a chance to like take this Mohawk account and really prove like there's more to him than Lucky Strike, dude, he just like fails, right? Like, and he has to do this last minute, give Peggy all of this crazy money just to like save face. And it's pathetic, but it's like pathetic in a way that I like, because it allows room for Peggy's growth as a character, because Peggy gets to come in and be like the smooth confidence she has to push Roger around at this point. I mean, yes, it makes sense because like Roger is a shadow of who he was in like seasons 1 and 2. But, you know, just seeing like Peggy, I mean, think about their interaction literally back when, I think it was around when Joan and Greg had that like horrific rape moment. I think it was the same episode, if I'm not wrong, where Peggy convinces Roger to get that office. I could be wrong about that, but anyway.
I'm not sure.
Or-
yeah.
I was gonna say you could also compare that then just a couple episodes ago when Harry Crane is getting worked by Roger, and like he has the money and he's like, "Oh, look at all this money I got out of him," but like it was nothing compared to like Roger's in
Right.
control of that situation. He was not in control of the Peggy one.
Exactly.
am a big fan of the shot where, and Pete only is like that one scene I think in this episode, right, where he talks to Roger,
Something like that. Yeah, I think.
I love how that scene, the way they frame it, it kind of almost looks like a psychosis, like therapy kind of thing, going to like what we were talking about before. But I also love it as a like Pete's like the dad checking in on his son, like, did you do your homework, son? Like, yes, dad. And then he like forgot, and like he's like trying to like pay some kid to like write his book report or something.
Yeah. I love the line where Peggy's like, the work is $10, the lie is extra. Oh, such a great Peggy moment. There's also all the Ginsburg stuff in this too, the Cinderella ad and everything. That also obviously plays into like it's dark, the literal symbolic thing with the Speck murders too. There's also a lot made about how the civil rights riots were happening around this time in 1966. A lot of them, not, there was something interesting mentioned in the commentaries though about how people remember like specific events like the Speck murders, it being 1966, but people don't really remember the riots of this particular summer. They just kind of remember the riots in the abstract. And so it's kind of interesting, at least as they put it, to see that these real life historical things were all happening around the same time. And that's something that a lot of shows and things that are trying to like be historically reminiscent tend to just kind of pick like one thing. But Mad Men's kind of unique because it's able to balance multiple things in a way that's pretty realistic. Because, I mean, think about today, like there's lots of things happening in the world right now that decades from now, people will maybe harp on like one particular thing, but, the reality is very different.
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt Zoller covered that aspect really well. I found his essay on this in this episode to be in much higher esteem than I think we all are on this episode, with maybe the exception of John. But he does talk about how other shows, I feel like when it tackles the race riots, would have probably been more like patting itself on the back and kind of like taking more space to kind of like clunkily address it. And I like that this episode acknowledges it, but also recognizes like how the characters can be ignorant, not even in an intentional way, just like they're just like oblivious to what's going on because they're not living the Black American experience. And like with Peggy only being aware of the nurse story, even though the race riots are literally happening only a few doors down basically from where she is, and much closer than,
and she's ignorant to how Dawn like can't get home.
Right.
There's this whole thing that Weiner talks about where he's like, after 7 p.m., if you're working in Manhattan and you're a woman of color, then you're not, there's no feasible way for you to get home. You're sleeping in that office. And that was they kind of exaggerated for the show, according to him, but this was something that happened all the time.
And I love the weight that's put on their scenes, Dawn and Peggy's scenes, where it's like, kind of minor things, but you feel the heaviness and the intensity of them, even though they're not like big, melodramatic moments in the scheme of things.
Tiona Paris, of course, plays Dawn, by the way, and will be worked again in WandaVision with Matt Shakman, just to make sure that connection is clear.
I also just think like this is like the peak of the show knowing itself, which I think is great. Like they can't pat themselves on the back and have this like big race riots like episode, I feel like, because they just hired their first Black worker out of like necessity of a bad joke that white people played. You know what I mean? So like, that would be such a big jump if there is like some big madman, like some person standing or like even acknowledging it. So like to play it ignorantly, I think is one, really good TV, but also be really good writing and understanding like where these characters would be and how like the show should actually treat it.
Yeah. And, I'm sure we're going to have plenty more conversations about how white guilt and white liberalism kind of plays itself out in this show because, moving forward, especially because it's coming out in the, the Barack Obama era of the presidency. And that is such a very specific moment, in the recent past. And, from our lens, of course, in 2025, when we're recording this, we have quite a lot of hindsight in terms of how a lot of, the West Wing kind of mode of white liberal politics and how much that has changed and been differently perceived, I guess, by a lot of people these days. So there you go.
Yeah, and I mean, just to kind of tie that up, I do also love the way it, like, Peggy is trying to be like a progressive-minded liberal woman, being like, you could be in my position one day, and then not realizing like Dawn doesn't really want that or doesn't know if she wants that yet, and like
her ego.
Right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, she's really talking to herself, not having a conversation with this person and listening to this person. Yeah. So I guess we could take this. So far, we've kind of done this scattershot kind of overall impressions, but maybe we take this piece by piece. I want to start with Joan and Greg. Maybe we get that out of the way, since it is the thing that probably doesn't fit the best, as we've established. So this is it for Greg, as far as Will Ashton knows. It looks like it is anyway. And they had their big reunion. And yeah, go ahead, Will. I mean,
I just kind of figured.
You're surprised?
No. If anything, I'm just kind of grateful it's finally over. Not only for Joan's sake, but just like I don't want to like bring this actor down, because I think he's pretty good, but he's just like so bland. And I get that, like, I liked in theory the idea of like, you know, someone that this is kind of like day-to-day evil is not going to be like, you know, like like just like scheming and all that. He's just kind of like a normal guy, but like he just never was that fascinating or interesting of a character to me. And I feel like a lot of the time invested in him and his arc with Joan just always kind of felt a little tiresome. And so I'm kind of glad that Joan can move on and be hopefully more central to the office again, but also just like have a more interesting cast of characters, hopefully, to interact with, I say.
You know, I mostly agree, except I will say this episode is the most interesting I find Greg, like, throughout. Honestly, the reason being, I think this is a guy who's just been such a failure. He wasn't able to do, you know, he just wasn't good at what he promised to be, but it just turns out that he is perfect for this job in the military, and his identity gets wrapped up in it. And we see him kind of, I mean, it plays into the dissolution of their marriage, really. It's like the final straw, I guess. But, you know, the way he is so confident and so at home with this identity of being part of, you know, the Vietnam War, I find it pretty interesting. You know, I do find that to be like, oh, finally, there's something kind of going on with this guy. And it kind of, and they mentioned in the commentary, is like, you would almost expect him to fail at this too, but the fact that he doesn't is all the more kind of like eyebrow raising, I guess. And yeah, to me, that's what makes it a satisfying way for him to go out.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched this, and I'm curious if you think of this, but like, I just was so sure Greg was just gonna get killed in Vietnam. Like, that was what was gonna happen. Like, writing was on the wall. Like, even Joan bringing up the all this stuff. And then when they didn't, I was very surprised. But on the rewatch, I think it makes more sense. But I don't know if that was something in your mind, Will.
Yeah, I mean, there was a part of me, like, not only that he would get killed in Vietnam, but there was a part of me that's just like, they find out the news. It's like, was he at least valiant? And like, it's like, no, he actually died just like getting off the plane. He just took a wrong step and like fell. Or like,
no, like this, or he peed on a piece of fire and blew himself up, and then somebody grabbed his dog tags.
Right. Could you imagine?
Right.
That's right.
Or just like a stray bullet just like hit him while he was, you know, fixing some cartery or whatever. Just like
friendly fire.
Some friendly fire thing that happened. Yeah.
Oh, artery.
Sorry,
artery.
I think I did say cartery. Yeah, but I meant to say artery. Yes. Yeah. Spare. Yes. Yeah.
Only other thing I wanted to add was just that the whole part where Joan is like, "You were never a good man," and the fact that like they mentioned this in the commentaries too. The fact that like so much of the audience knows exactly what she's talking about. That the show doesn't have to come out and say explicitly referring back to something that happened 2-3 seasons ago. We know. Because it's always been there in this relationship. It's never left. And that's just such a great metaphor for like how this happens in real life and how this just, you know, it's always there. And it's like, even if, you know, the woman stays with the man in this case, it's not like that just goes away. And so it's, to me, that's what makes this, of course, so long overdue. But also it's a big moment for Joan in the best way, because like, yes, finally, fuck this guy. He's gone.
I will say, I do think I know they're still being subtle about it, but I still think they put too fine of a point on it. I just think if they had just left it as "you were never a good man," it's like keep like, I don't know. I felt like they didn't trust the audience enough with like the way her line is delivered. It's just like, we get it. I don't know.
I think it works just right for me, but I can see that point.
Sure.
The last thing I'll say on the Joan stuff is I just like this is when Joan becomes like such a great character for me. Like this full cycle of like think of Joan season 1 who only cares about I feel like the optics. She just wants the perfect life. She's waiting for that perfect husband. And now she is a divorced single mom who is now at this point unemployed. Like, oh, how the mighty have fallen.
But it's actually exciting in a way.
Totally.
We finally see like, okay, what's going to happen with Joan next? Because yes, we're putting aside those season 1 motivations and letting her see what she's made of. Okay, so that's the Joan and Greg stuff. Bye, Greg. See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya. Let's talk about Don's side of this plot. I think it starts the whole episode, if I'm remembering right. There's the whole thing in the elevator with Megan, and there's a whole thing where, you know, yes, Don got around New York City, if you know what I mean. He definitely has some stuff in his closet. And, you know, they have like the weird interaction with Megan and everything. And that's another thing that's kind of like sticking in the background of this show. How much does Megan know about Don's infidelity? Clearly, she knows some stuff. She was his secretary. She knows that he is a person capable of doing that because he cheated on his girlfriend with Megan. So it's not like she's naive to this. But then, of course, there's always that in the back of everybody's heads, right? Like Don's married to Megan now. He seems to have been faithful so far to Megan. But what happens when he's actually tempted? And so that's how they explain this in the commentaries too. But that's kind of the idea behind this. And the fever dream, of course, is working on multiple levels. It's trying to kind of show that Don hasn't completely changed. He's not a new man, but he is trying. And it is one of those things where you can read into it in a lot of different ways. It's a have your cake and eat it too kind of moment because we're sort of, you know, seeing what Don would do, but he doesn't actually do it. So that's a big criticism that tends to get levied at this aspect of the episode. But I'm curious, what do you guys think? Will, did the dream sequence actually work for you, or did you think it was too heavy-handed?
Well, first I just want to say I do really like that this episode, by having Don be sick, we finally, or not finally, but we once again, though rarely, get to see him in a more vulnerable position because I feel like he's always in some manner or another, like kind of like the big man on campus and kind of able to throw his weight around. But just as soon as we see him, he's already like Hack Fleming and like kind of crouched over and like, you know, clearly a little bit like white in the face and
John
all that.
Hamm is so good at playing sick. He nails it. Yeah.
Yeah. I just feel like, you know, there's never really a moment in this episode where he really feels like he's in full authority, which is really fascinating because I can't think of another episode where he's like completely helpless in this way. Like in other episodes where he is kind of like that, even like some of the California episodes, he still feels like he can like gain some sense of agency, I guess. And this one just feels like he's so totally, you know, pulled upon or weighed down by his illness.
Yeah, that's such a great point because even with the Ginsburg stuff, he kind of just lets Ginsburg totally hijack that meeting with the Cinderella pitch. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he's not caring about his job. He's not locked in, if we can use a phrase that's going to be outdated in 1 year. We'll use crash out later.
Have you ever seen anyone do that, John, where like someone just hijacks and just does?
When have I not? Mike,
really?
I'm sure, has seen it too. I mean, yes, it happens all the time. And there's a reason, like the whole thing, they talk about this in the commentaries, like stuff like that happening it's very much a common occurrence to like send people out on their ass for doing stuff like that because you do not cut you don't cut the heels of your creative director, especially in front of them, especially in that room. Like that is like so taboo. Now, of course, I think the dressing down that Ginsburg gets, it's a little over the top, but it's warranted. But of course, like Don's just being an asshole to, an extent.
Well, that's the only real time he like asserts himself in this episode, really. And like,
it's so half-assed, isn't it?
Right.
He normally would have fired him.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I was going to say it was that. Yeah, I feel like normal Don would just like instantly, especially because he's like the new guy in the totem pole and he has Pete like tendencies. Like I think he wants a kind of similar to Pete in season 1, wants to have Don like tendencies, but for the most part, Ginsburg's more Pete-esque at this point. And he's just kind of, you can tell he's like a little annoyed already with Ginsburg, like from the get-go. So yeah, I think normal Don, healthy Don maybe, would have just been like, yeah, he's on his ass. But yeah,
I think if this had been like Dale, if this had been like Danny or somebody, I think the fact that Ginsburg is genuinely talented is kind of what saves his skin here.
he did get what they wanted. So it is a kind of push and pull of like, okay, like on the one hand, he is giving them what they want. They like that pitch more than the other one, but they were perfectly happy with that other one, and now they have to do extra work.
The other
really
pitch
no
is
reason
better because this one, the whole idea of like the Cinderella thing, it's so overplayed. Like, of
Sure.
course, because Cinderella had come out in 1960, so by this time, it's a 6-year-old movie.
Mhm.
So many
Also
ads have probably done things with shoes. Yeah.
Also a 100-year-old fairy tale. not
Yeah, but obviously,
Yeah.
like it repopularized it, so it's like even more in the cultural fervor at this point.
Sure, I know. But yeah, I agree. I'm just saying that they liked it more, the original pitch, which I do agree was better. But yeah,
Mike,
yes.
you're a pitch guy. What's your take on it?
I mean, yeah, it's definitely fucked up. You definitely shouldn't do it. I think a big part of it too is, not just that Ginsburg does it, but he gets called a genius by the clients, which Don clearly like doesn't like, which I think then leads to like, I think that's why the dressing down was how it was. I don't think it was Don just being an outright asshole, like trying to teach him a lesson. I think it was also a little bit of insecurity. Like,
Oh, 100%.
I do think it's interesting, like bringing up the talent piece of Ginsburg. It's interesting to compare like how Don treats Ginsburg's talent versus like when he sees like talent in Peggy. Like Don is never at one point intimidated by Peggy, so all he does is try to like flourish that talent and give her opportunities and like left and right, like provide her with more help or insights. Whereas Ginsburg is just like, motherfucker, be good and listen. Like you like there's no like mentorship happening there.
You know what the irony is, though? Peggy is more ambitious than Ginsburg. The thing is, though, like she knows her place because culturally, societally, she has to. And like there's that whole thing in this episode. It connects really well where she is kind of like, do I need to be a man? Should I be a man? And all of this crisis stuff. Whereas Ginsburg, like, I think why that pitch works with the Cinderella thing is the way he tells it. It doesn't come across like he's trying to sell something. He's like a true artist. He just finds it to be a really cool pitch. And like that enthusiasm, that earnestness, I think is what sells it. And that's why the guy's like, well, why don't we just do that? And there's almost like you could read in some insecurity to Don there. It's like, man, I used to be like that. I used to be able to pitch in a way that, wasn't just genuine, but came off as genuine. And I think he and Peggy aren't really like that. They're very like performative by comparison.
Yeah, I was gonna say like I know you guys aren't big Simpson guys, but I feel like Peggy has like Lisa Simpson energy, whereas Ginsburg has like Martin energy, where he's like obviously smart and talented, but he's just like such a nerd and so kind of just like kind of frustrating that it's just like, yeah, okay. And I feel like the other thing about him is that like obviously all these people, I mean Don especially, but like they're all kind of doing impressions of like what they perceive an adult to be. And I feel like Ginsburg is kind of like doing a sort of like his interpretation of like a His Girl Friday version of being an admin still. Like I feel like he's not comfortable in his place in the office and in his shoes. And I still feel like he's like kind of like putting more emphasis on his voice and like kind of like doing, he's like kind of like play acting still a little bit. And I understand
he's still true to himself. Like he stands up for himself. Like when everybody's kind of like titillated is the word they use in the commentaries by the Richard Speck murder stuff. He's the only person who's kind of like, hey guys, that's like fucked up. Like what happened here and you're making light of it. Like, I think like that also kind of comes from a place of like, he's not performative. He hams it up, but I do think it comes from an honest place. It's a strange combination of things.
I think he's honest with himself. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mike, but I was just going to say that I still feel like he's like, like this is disgusting. See, like he's like, almost like doing like a Jimmy Stewart, like it's like you're all mad. See, yeah, I don't know. But sorry, what were you going to say?
I think that's actually the big difference between like when you compare it, like Peggy is like more ambitious, but the difference is I think Peggy worked on her talent. Like she spent all those nights reading the books and understanding the industry and like learning from Don, where Ginsburg, he didn't like necessarily like he is an eccentric genius. Like he has had this talent, he has had these thoughts, and they just kind of come from him within. Like he's not book smart. He's like more street smart as far as the talent comes. And so like that's why I think he can be more true to himself, or like that's why it's like he treats the ambition different, because for him, is just like, I've had this inside me my whole life and now I need to get it out and I have the opportunity. Whereas Peggy is, I just want to see at the table, and now that I have it, I'm going to make sure I know how to keep my seat at the table.
No, that's 100%, because Ginsburg has been so far rewarded for being true to himself in that way. Peggy comes from a background where no, like if she tries to be true to herself like that, she gets punished because she's a woman, because society doesn't, uplift her, and all of those things. So, but okay, so the fever dream stuff. Let's finally get to that. So Don. Oof, I'm Will Ashton. Yeah, a little bit of a Freudian slip there. Will Ashton, back to my original question though. The actual dream sequence where Don is sick, of course, and then Andrea comes into the apartment and all of this stuff. But first of all, obviously, yes, did the dream sequence work for you? But also, were you able to clock that? Like, were you able to clock that as a dream sequence? And if so, when?
I think it was when, like, Dawn opened like some door we've never seen before in the kitchen.
It was just like, wait a second.
Right. I feel like that was the moment, like, even if I wasn't totally conscious of like, this is a dream, I was like, that seems very bizarre. The whole scene in the bedroom, I knew 100% was a dream. I mean, there was like a small part the first time I watched it where I was like, whoa, but what if it isn't a dream? But like, I was pretty sure throughout that I was like, yeah, this is like a dream. Because it's just like, it's too heightened. It's like, even like by Mad Men standards, it doesn't feel like something that would organically happen in the show, unless Matthew Weiner went totally haywire. And I'm not saying that's an impossibility, but like,
yeah.
But it didn't seem like it at the time. But yeah, I feel like it was always sort of, suggested outside of the elevator scene that everything going on was kind of outside the realm of possibility. And obviously, like I said before, having Mashkin Amick in it, like, allows that kind of like idea of the Lynchian sort of like, is this fully a dream? Is this reality? Not really sure. Blending the two idea. Obviously, this is more dream than not, and in fact, entirely dream. But yeah, the invitation to feel like you're walking somewhere in between, I think, is inspired in her casting. I just wish they leaned into that more readily, because the only episode I can think of so far that even feels remotely Lynchian is the one where
The Fog?
The Fog. Yeah.
100%. And again, that's another episode that it comes from Weiner. I don't think I mentioned that he did co-wrote the episode. I said Victor Levin wrote it, but Weiner did co-write this, I believe. But I think that's it. Also, another thing that really clocks it for people is like, Andrea is way too thirsty for Dawn, who's coughing and sick. Like, what woman would do this? Like, no, we have to have sex. Like, straight up, just like assaulting that guy almost. And I do like, though, even though I agree, like it is a little much, this whole thing. I do like the way it connects to the Cinderella thing with like how she comes back, the red shoes thing. Yeah, the survivor under the bed, that whole thing. I do like how they layer this stuff into the episode, and like, it's not super subtle, but it's like, it's just the right amount of subtle where like most people are going to get it, but they're not going to feel like, they'll feel smart for getting it, I guess, which I appreciate about Mad Men. It helps us feel smarter.
And I mean, hiding under the bed, both with Sally and with
that's what I mean. Yeah,
Andrea,
and the real life thing. Yeah,
also very Lynchian in the sense of like, what's underneath the surface idea, like what's going on. I think that was kind of telling, very a little on the nose there, but yeah.
Mike, we've been trash talking this dream sequence. Are you going to come in and defend it? Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, my read on it when I watched it the first time was that like, I clocked it as a dream sequence, but I also took it as like Don wanting to see the best in himself. Like, I think this is Don trying to convince himself that part of his life is over. Like, he's literally killing that part of his past and sweeping it under the rug, like he's past it. And
I love my wife.
Exactly.
Yeah, the commentaries, they talked about how when they showed this to focus groups, so many people, and they were talking about like their real life experiences, like watching it with like their partners and stuff, that like there's like, Don, like when he starts like sleeping with her, even though they clock it as a dream too, but like there's just this idea of like, here he goes again. But I think the key to this, and the thing I like about it, is that I think it's clear to me that it's not that Don is scared of cheating again. I think he's genuinely scared of who he is. And he's scared of being this guy, because I think he recognizes there is a thin line between sex and violence, and the way that has kind of played into his life and his affairs and all of that. And so it gives us a glimpse into his psyche that I think is pretty relevant, even if it is a bit heavy-handed.
I also think, and this is kind of tying back to what we were saying before, when Don has affairs and all that stuff, he's in control. And I feel like this whole episode is like Don being afraid of not having control of his image. And the idea that like he's created this Don Draper persona. He's kind of made a self-made man. He's kind of like made himself. And there's always this fear that like something will come out. And it's kind of happened already with Betty. But like this idea of like, it's all going to dissipate and get away from his control. Like he always wants to be the guy that can like pack a suitcase and leave, I think. And I think it's interesting because Megan's obviously much more aware of that and like less caring about it, but there is still that ingrained fear for Don of like not knowing when everything, like when the floor might pull out, like the rug might pull out from under him,
Yeah. So I want to move on to the Peggy stuff. The Peggy's night with Don. She's up late, and they had to have this whole thing where she gets all this money from Roger, and it plays into that whole thing with Don, DAWN, of where she is fearful and suspicious, toward Don, and seems to be like a moment, not just paranoia, but internalized racism. And we are going to see, of course, because it's the 1960s, how race plays into and starts to affect the lives of these white people. And I think it's so fascinating, especially to watch this episode for the first time for me during a moment in our current time where DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion are obviously like the forefront of like the political news. And I think like this whole idea, right, of like people who benefit from DEI, and the facts say that it's typically white women. And so this episode kind of fittingly, I think, plays with that a bit in terms of like how Peggy has this moment with Don. And even though I don't think it's like the most, I think like it's a very simple kind of construct. I think that the episode, you could say, is judging Peggy for what's happening here, but I'm not totally sure. Like I'm not, even with like in the commentaries, they seem to of course be like, yeah, Peggy, it's more true to life that like, yes, this stuff is happening with civil rights, but people who think that they're progressive, that they're not racist, of course that they're going to have these moments. What was y'all's take on it though? I know Will, you love DEI. You're high-fiving DEI on the way to work.
I should preface, and the listeners won't know this, but just for your two sake, when you were talking in Mike's chat, his wife was walking by in the background, and I was trying to wave to catch her attention futilely, but I realized as I was doing that you were talking about DEI, and it's like, people benefit from it, and I'm like waving my hand like, yeah!
Especially white women.
Woo!
Yeah!
Hell yeah, brother.
Yeah, sorry. But yeah.
But yes, a podcast with three white men talking about DEI.
So I just wanted to clarify for your two sake that wasn't what I was going for, but I could see the reason why you might be confused about that.
My favorite thing happening in the background, though, was when Mike's cat kind of jumped up on the little thing. It was really cute. Little cute cat. But anyway.
Got a cat tree behind me. They're going to jump on it.
Sorry, Will, I had a question for you. Yes, the Peggy stuff. I don't even remember how I worded the question.
I don't even remember either, but
you weren't paying attention.
What I think the question was, what do you think of DEI, Will Ashton?
Oh boy.
No. Okay. But we just take it abstract. But yeah, so the Peggy Don stuff. What do you really think the show is really saying about this in an honest way? Like, do you think it's a more nuanced thing? Do you think that it's the show just kind of being like, white people are racist even when they have good intentions or whatever?
I think that's obviously part of it. I think we kind of see a broad spectrum of outward racism and internalized racism throughout the show. And it seems like Peggy, more so than I think a lot of other characters, is a socially self-conscious person. And I think she wants to be perceived as, someone who is progressive, someone who is understanding, someone who is better than her peers. She grew up in this like very religious household, and I think she kind of wants to separate herself in a lot of ways from that. And I think there is that, temptation to kind of like think like, oh, okay, I'm enlightened, I'm better than them. And you have this scene where nothing really even happens per se in a physical sense. She just kind of looks a second too long in her purse, and Dawn realizes it. But the moment is impactful because, what was otherwise a pretty, clumsy but entirely well-meaning effort on Peggy's part to invite this black coworker into her place, give her some shelter to stay, give her some words of encouragement, even if it was more self-centered in its intent than she wanted it to be, was coming from a pretty sincere-ish place. Now is just kind of deflated by, this.
So yeah, that's what I like about it, because it's like, I don't know, I feel like what the stuff we grew up on, it painted the racism, especially of the 60s, as this like cartoonish thing that like, you just like exaggerate it to Kingdom Come, of like bigotry means that like you can't even be around, people of color. Like you're like, oh, don't even touch me. And it's like that kind of thing. But shows like these, I think, are a little bit more honest about like, no, this stuff, like people you like, people who seem like great people and are nice, and like racism kind of exists in these like little things. And like we treat racism as like, if you're a racist, you're a Nazi or something. And it's like equating, these things with like the most extreme version of them. So then people get hypersensitive when you call out like, hey, what you did in this moment was really uncool, was prejudice. Then people are like, oh, you're saying that I'm this like irredeemable, like, unforgivable person or whatever. It's like, no, like Peggy is still like, she's still a nice person. I think she was trying to do something nice for her coworker, but she does have this internalized prejudice that came out in a moment of weakness. She's also drunk, but like even up to that, she had been treating Don in a way that was like kind of uncomfortable, and she had this kind of, because she feels like so in control of the situation. It comes off as like condescending too, but it's not that she's necessarily a bad person. It's that that we're all shaped by our environments, and the fact that like you could hopefully read into the situation as like maybe Peggy learned something from this, of like, hey, yeah, maybe I kind of got a little bit too big for my britches here, and that would be a nice thing to see, especially when she gets that note from Dawn the next morning. That's kind of gracious, like Dawn clearly, like, this isn't the first time she's dealt with stuff like this, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to know, as far as like the 60s revolution, that a lot of the characters, they've interacted obviously with black people, but a lot of the times they're in kind of servient positions. Like the only real people we see in the office before Dawn who are black are like the janitor and like the elevator attendant and all this stuff. And I think there is like this distance where a lot of what they know about black identity is like stuff they read or they hear. And I think we're even seeing, in a modern sense, like I think that's kind of happened with like trans people, where like a lot of people didn't know that like people were trans, or they didn't know someone directly was trans. And so like I think there's a lot of bigotry because people just read things, obviously a lot of horrible false things that give them these false perceptions of like what trans identity is. And I think that was kind of happening throughout the 50s, obviously, and before that with race identity. And so even though Peggy is an enlightened person and then someone who I think is of fairly good intentions when it comes to race, sympathetic, yeah, I think she is still, someone who, like we said, is like flawed, is a bookish person and has read things but hasn't had meaningful one-on-one interactions with black people.
She's young. She's young and inexperienced with this. Yeah, exactly. All right, Mike, we've been, talking so much about this. you haven't been able to get a word in edgewise.
No, I agree with everything you guys are saying. I'm really glad it's Peggy who they have this moment with, because I do think she's like the most sympathetic to the audience. Like I think throughout the whole show, a lot of times Peggy is kind of like the conduit to the audience as the softest character, someone you're kind of rooting for all the time. You see yourself in her. And so then to have her then be the one to have this moment. And I really like what you said, John. I agree that it is kind of uncomfortable, actually, even the whole time, like leading up to it. It's almost like Peggy knows that, like, look at me, I'm being so good and progressive. I've like letting this black woman come stay at my house so she has to go back to these riots. Like, this is really great. And yeah, and then you have that moment. It's just like we all can have those moments. And it's racism isn't just this big, like, this big hatred you have inside yourself where you're like the world's biggest bigot. It's these these little moments that come up where you think the worst of someone because of something you've internalized. So yeah, I don't know. I think I just kind of want to echo everything you're saying, especially what you said about the trans people too. That's a really great like modern day.
Yeah, I mean
example.
it's macro and micro moments, really.
Yeah. All right, so I guess all we have left here is the Sally and Pauline stuff. And, I always get more and more out of this every time I rewatch this episode. I kind of mentioned before, there's like a lot of cringy stuff happening here, but I think this is such a great showcase for Kieran and Shipka because we don't get to see her interact too much with characters besides her parents. Like we've seen her interact with her like therapist for sure, but we haven't really seen her interact with another authority figure who isn't Betty, who isn't Dawn, who kind of challenges her. And we see kind of how Sally is shaping into a person outside of her family unit, or at least her immediate family unit, because this is her stepdad's mom, who is kind of this like old generation kind of different way of doing things. But I did want to start too, though. There's the whole phone call she has with Dawn that I just think is really cute and charming. And like, you could just kind of see like the relationship, like as Sally's getting older, Dawn's always wanted Sally to grow up a bit more and to treat her more like, he's having her make drinks for him in like seasons 1 and 2 or whatever. And here it's like, they kind of talk to each other like, yeah, Don's the parent, but he clearly just kind of has this like affection for Sally that is just different. Like he doesn't talk to Bobby this way. He's just like, Bobby, clean your room and play some baseball, you little turd. But with Sally, he's just like, did you see the news? Like, it's just like a different mentality. And there's even the little moment where she like makes him laugh. They mentioned in the commentaries, it's like, yeah, when the first time like my daughter made me laugh, I was kind of like, oh wow, like that's such a cool moment.
I mean, Dawn did say that she brightened his day, or something like that because
yeah.
So Bobby's at sleepaway camp, they said, and he's peeing his pants.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He's just living his best
Bobby,
life,
right.
While Sally's in like training for being like a scream queen kind of character. I mean, she is going to be in Sabrina the Teenage Witch later in her career, but I do think it is like more visceral with Sally in this storyline, the Richard Speck murders, because she's young. She's the closest to age of these nurses. And clearly like the terror that she has is like, it's not just about Richard Speck and all of this. I think that it's realizing like being a girl, soon to be a woman, means that she's never going to be totally safe, and there's the whole mystery date board game commercial thing. It comes in at the perfect moment because it's this great metaphor and learning lesson for Sally, because she sees how like in stuff like this, girls are taught to dream about romance, the perfect guy, but the world might hand them a killer instead. Right. And this is just one of those many moments where it's Sally kind of reckoning with what it means to be a woman and the danger that comes with womanhood and all the cautionary stuff that you could read into as well, with like what happens to Andrea in this scene, how Megan is treated. And of course, the whole thing with Joan, the episode ends with like Joan and this like little male baby, in between her and her mom, and this generational thing. And I think these are the aspects of the episode I like the most.
I mean, like literally, like we were saying, Bobby is able to be a kid. He's at camp with all these other kids and peeing his pants still. And everyone's just like, oh, Bobby, like cute kid. But like, with Sally, it's like, when are you going to grow up?
You're
raped.
old enough to know what rape is.
Right. Yeah.
She's also listening to like the gossiping and being like, oh, well, how short were the skirts that the nurses were wearing? So like, she's also like learning about victim blaming.
Yeah.
And how like, she needs to protect herself from being murdered and raped. But also if it does happen, it's probably your fault.
Well, I will say, for one, the grandma,
Pauline,
great performance, by the way. I think that's a really outstanding performance. I wanted to highlight that. Yeah. That character is so fascinating to me, and I don't know how much she'll be a part of the show moving forward, but I love that she's like obviously very protective, but like as soon as Sally just does like oh yeah, I read it in the paper, she's like, all right, now here are the details. It's like very like
that's a part where Weiner is just like says that Pauline's turned on by this situation.
Sure, it's like very like when people talk about like true crime, it's just like oh, what a terrible story, and then like you're like, oh, I watched this documentary, let me tell you like all the details about it. It's just like, oh, that sounds messed up. Yes. And then,
she's not comforting at all.
Right.
She's kind of she's trying to be a maternal figure, trying to be like, oh, this generation doesn't know anything, and I need to be more strict and all of this stuff. And she badmouths Betty all the time, even like little things, with like, especially in this house, you can't scare me. Like always taking shots at Betty. But like, yeah, there's this kind of like, yeah, there's this like cold suspicion she has and this obsession she has with the murdered nurses, especially like Mike said, that they brought it on themselves and all this stuff. And she drugs Sally.
Yeah.
With second off. It's terrible.
Well,
but
hey,
yeah, I mean, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'm so sorry to cut you off, Will. I was going to say, with, Pauline is a victim herself. I mean, she brought it up.
Right.
Her dad was kicking the shit out of her for no reason.
Real story that somebody told them, Weiner, somebody who passed right before the episode came out, Frank Peterson, I think.
Yeah, the writer of the next episode.
Yeah, so he had this, like, that's a literal story that happened to him, and he told Weiner the story of this abuse, and Weiner was like, "Can we do that?" He was like, "Yes, I want you to take it so it's not mine anymore."
Oh, wow.
Like, holy shit. Damn.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think he passed. Well, I'm not excited that he passed, but I'm excited to see his episode because I know it's supposed to be one of the best. Not to tee up next episode when we watch it in 5 months, but I heard that he like it was like his last thing, but he's like a notorious like famous screenwriter. We'll talk about it.
It's Frank Pearson, not Peterson. Sorry.
Sure. But anyway, yeah, no, I mean, that fascinating character, really complicated, even just for the little moments we get of her. I'm sure she made a hell of a tuna sandwich too, even though it looked pretty bland and not very exciting, and I could see why Sally didn't want it.
Greg's sandwich looked better, honestly. He had that sandwich, he had a beer. Give that to Sally.
Yeah, he's good with his hands now.
The whole thing where she puts out the butcher knife, her burglar alarm, and cuts the second. I was like, that's David Lynch right there. Okay. Anything else that you guys wanted to cover in the episode that we didn't get to? I think we basically got it.
I like the receptionist is still like, I'm supposed to introduce you. When what's her face from Girls comes in.
Allison.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we got a glimpse of her too with like when Joan came to the office, and she's ditzy, but I think Allison's she's like Ginsburg level of genius. We just don't see it yet.
I hope so, yeah. I hope she saves the company in the season finale somehow.
A little bit of trivia here. So the moment where Don returns to bed after he kicks Andrea out, that's actually reverse footage of him getting out of the bed earlier. It's actually kind of hard to tell, but once you know it, then you see it for sure. But Shakman has said that he did that on purpose because he wanted to emphasize the surreal kind of dreamlike quality of the fever sequence. And it would help you as the viewer feel that something's off without explicitly saying it. So if you didn't catch the whole weird elevator door thing, which is like a real part of the set, then yeah, that's like, they didn't add it to the set. It was something that was already part of it and just kind of helped their purposes. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Are you guys disappointed that you didn't see Don's penis?
I mean, you may not have, but I have a stronger imagination than you.
Mike's
every episode. Episode. Not even when he has sex. Just I'm like, I want to see full hog.
We got pretty close in this. They like shadowed it where he like after he kills Andrea, it's like, I see what you're doing there.
We almost saw his Richard Speck.
Yeah, there you go.
This was, as we mentioned before, Victor Levin co-wrote this episode. This is the first episode he ever wrote for Mad Men. However, he has been a co-executive producer for some time. So before he wrote for TV, though, he worked in advertising. So big reason why the show has so much accuracy. He's one of the top advisors for it. He worked at Y&R, so Young and Rubicam. He also worked at BBDO. So yeah, he knew Madison Avenue firsthand. So it's kind of cool seeing him write this in. He won a couple of Clio Awards, actually. And also, yeah, I think that it's interesting in this episode in particular because there's not that much like agency stuff that happens. Like there's the Cinderella pitch, but otherwise it's like, it's not a full on, like we're in the office. Like it's no, it just doesn't have like the full throated focus on the office stuff. But nevertheless, he got to help write this episode. We mentioned the Matt Shakman stuff, how, he was directing. He did direct WandaVision. He also directed the upcoming Fantastic Four reboot. This is the first and only episode of Mad Men that he directed, but he did make a splash with this episode. It definitely put him on some radars. Yeah, he has a theater background. He ran the LA Jeffens Playhouse, and so you could maybe say that plays into like the Don Fever Dream stuff, like how operatic the tone is, and the kind of like the staging of Sally's storyline, the big house, and like it does feel there's some like play-like kind of references in there you could read into it, maybe if you want to.
I mean, I have to assume this episode helped with getting the job for WandaVision because the like 60s retro time. And also, isn't the new Fantastic Four takes place in the 60s? Yeah.
Yeah, so even though this episode came out, 8 years before WandaVision came out,
Sure.
surely that's part of it. So
he directed a lot of episodes of Always Sunny. That's the main thing I know about.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And also, the episode is purposely structured to work like a horror film. Weiner explicitly stated this in the commentaries. It was both written and shot to be like a horror movie. And he said his theme of the show is like, it's about what it means to be a man, this carnal, dangerous, impulsive male. And Pauline even says, like, at one point to kind of bolster this, I can't believe this happened in real life. So that's like a line that's supposed to describe the entire episode, according to him. And the only other thing for trivia I had here was that the $410 that Peggy makes, if you adjust for inflation, would be $4,000 today.
I figured, yeah.
Not too shabby for a weekend kind of project there. It would be literally worth, so if you do the math for inflation in 2024, it'd be $3,973. So there you go.
So Roger's just carrying $4,000 on his person.
Yeah, I mean, that's Roger.
Yeah.
$850 for lunch.
Right.
I love that line that he says. And nevertheless, he's always got some cash on him. All right, guys. Even after he got mugged last season, how about that? That should do it for this week's episode of Mad Men. Men, thank you so much for listening to the show. We'll be back hopefully soon to talk about episode 5 of season 5, Signal 30. This is another John Slattery episode, the first and only John Slattery directed episode of the season. And as Will already teased up, we have Frank Pearson and Matthew Weiner writing that one as well. So looking forward to talking that with you folks, you fine gentlemen, soon. But for now, we'll see you all in the next episode.
It's clobbering time.